Rafael.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Where's Dr. Larry? How much sleep did you get?
I'm awake.
Yeah? Let's see. We'll see if it's you stay awake. 3 hours? Okay. Thank you so much for having me. This is fun to be here. Your organizers do such a good job, so thank you. I spoke to some of the other faculty members, and our rooms are stocked with chocolates, fruit. Some of them have wine. You guys put whiskey in my room, so thank you. Thank you. I've not had any yet, but I promise you maybe I will. So let's talk about sleep and how to update. Let's talk a little bit of updating on sleep. First of all, what is sleep? Sleep's the most natural form of self-care that we have. There's nothing to replace sleep. That's painting by the muralist Diego Rivera. Why the seal? Seals sleep like we do when they're on the beach. But when they're in the water, they sleep like the dolphins do. So half their brain sleeps when they're in the water, half stays awake, and when they're on the beach, they sleep like we do, both have at the same time. So the way you sleep reflects your life, right? Your life is reflected in your sleep is reflected in your life. And plus, the seal is kind of cute. So, I trained in child neurology, and I always thought of sleep kind of as an extension of a study of consciousness. And I used to perhaps arrogantly think, well, sleep is a brain thing. It's not for the pulmonologist, like Dr. Chura right there, right? No. But now I know it's not really true, right? Without the heart, there is no consciousness. And the entire body sleeps. For example, when you're sleeping, your body makes less urine. It's a nice thing it does. There's actually glomerular filtration rates go down in our sleep. And another thing that happens in our sleep, it's all coordinated. Peristalsis in our gut and the colon decreases as you're sleeping. So almost as deeper you're sleeping, there's pretty much no peristalsis goes on. But then, interestingly, at the very end of the colon, closer to where your anus is, there's actually a retrograde wave to keep things from leaking out. So it's all synchronized to help us stay asleep. The whole mechanism is preserved to help us sleep better. So functions of sleep, and classically when you give talks on sleep, people say, well, we don't know why we sleep, but we're beyond that now. We have a better sense of why we sleep, and sleep cannot have just one function, it's going to have multiple functions. It's involved definitely with learning and memory, synaptic plasticity. There's data on how creativity works. There has to be a physiology to creativity. Since we're not plants, since we're animals, we have to be able to hunt and gather. You have to be able to adapt to a changing environment. How do you deal with the changing environment? Well, sleep seems to be a core concept in that because it helps you learn new information that you acquired during the day, consolidate with information you've had in the past, also forget things that aren't necessary to remember, and then the next day start over and integrate all that. So there has to be a process for this. There's actually artificial intelligence models. When you incorporate dream theory, the computers function better. So there's something to this. And there's data how lucid dreaming enhances creativity also. Some of you are lucid dreamers. Have you been aware that your dream's a dream ever and stayed in your dream? You've done it. Did you have fun? Yeah. Okay, good for you. Good for you. Okay. It also has restorative functions. Clearly, the brain is an electrical organ. About 20% of our calories are consumed by the brain. And a lot of that biosynthesis, a lot of that system is happening there. Now, sleep should be restorative. You should never wake up tired. If you're waking up tired, something is wrong. You should not. Are you waking up tired? You're looking at me, Sydney. Sydney, say yeah? Well, you had a lot on your plate, though. You've been helping organize the meeting, so you may not have slept well last night. I usually sleep pretty well. Last night, I didn't sleep that well. I kept popping away because I was thinking to have the talk ready. What am I going to be doing? So definitely the situation I was in reflected how I slept. But we're supposed to talk a little bit about COVID. So a lot of people slept worse during COVID. I didn't. I slept pretty well. I kind of liked it. I don't know what, I learned what the beauty of telemedicine. It was pretty nice because I don't do interventional work. I was outpatient work, so I'd have the same shirt, be in front of the computer, putting the shirt back on, put it on the next day, right? Weeks went by, I didn't wear any socks. Turned out that a lot of people slept better during the pandemic. I don't know if you felt you slept better, depending on what you were doing. Certainly, healthcare disparities were heightened by the pandemic. So depending on the kind of work you did, some people could take the time off and some couldn't. Some could do telemedicine, some could not. With adolescents, there was definitely a group of teenagers that were sleeping better, but there was a lot of people who were sleeping worse. And I think it reflected how stressful life can be, where you might sleep better during a global pandemic because you don't have to deal with commuting and all these other things that deal with this. But definitely there's data now consistently, and will probably be more studies coming out on slow COVID or long COVID, how that played out. But definitely the pandemic affected how people sleep. I want to do an update on some of the science with sleep, and this paper just came out. It's from Stanford, Dr. De La Cia. This is in Science, not the New England Journal of Medicine, but actually Science. And that was in, just came out last month. And they found this is in old mice, aged mice. And one of the things about being older is you don't sleep as well. Your sleep is fragmented. We think that's fragmentation of sleep. It may be playing a role in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, for example. So they took old mice and figured out, well, why do they sleep so choppy? Turns out that there's a neurotransmitter system called hypocretin/orexin, and I'll talk more about that later. And it's hyperexcitable. And what they did with these mice was they found that this system, I'll show you a slide of it here. I can't ever see these things. Is it on? Oh, I have it on backwards? Is it on? I'm colorblind, so I never know what I'm looking. Oh, there it is. So, there it is. So, there are these hypocretin neurons. That's the third ventricle, that little teardrop-looking thing. And the neurons start dying off. And they're hyperexcitable, but our sleep gets choppy, or the sleep cycles get shorter. And the cool thing is they did an animal model is that they took young mice, damaged the system, and the mice started behaving like old mice. And then they used a medication I never heard of before. And I was in the back when I was pacing, I was trying to say it over and over again in my head. But as you were talking about your meds, they kept interfering, so now they're stuck in my head. Fluperitine. It's a non-opiate analgesic that was used in Europe that's taken off the market because in humans it causes liver toxicity. But injecting it into these mice when they were old rejuvenated their sleep. So there's potentially a way of rejuvenating all of our sleep. This just came out. That's why it's in Science. It's February of 2022, this came out. So there's a potential target now by trying to decrease the hyperactivity of these hypocretin cells to rejuvenate all of our sleep. So that may be a promise for us in the future to do. It's kind of cool. These are the sleep disorders we typically deal with: insomnia, sleep apnea, parasomnia, restless legs, narcolepsy. And we can talk about all of these. And we do have time for questions. And we usually run out of time before we run out of questions when we talk about sleep. But on sleep apnea, I'm going to talk to you about, that's Jerry Garcia, that's Anthony Scalia. What do they have in common? They both died of sleep apnea in their sleep. Sleep apnea can kill you. And when Judge Scalia passed away, there was an editorial in our main journal, Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine, saying, oh, when are we going to stop talking about dying of natural causes? What is dying in your sleep about? When are we going to treat snoring like blood in your stool, right? It's something you should be checking. It's nothing to be ignored. So Garcia died, he was in rehab, so he was coming off opiates. And you have REM rebound when you come off opiates. His tox screen was clean. So when you have REM rebound, that's a arrhythmogenic situation. Heart attacks and sudden death cluster in the early morning hours when you have the bulk of our REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. So apparently that's what happened. The newspaper reports were that they heard him snoring, and then they stopped snoring. And that's when he died. Judge Scalia was traveling, and he was in a hunting lodge, and he was found dead with his CPAP machine unplugged at his bedside. And it's something for you to remember. So this happens to all of you who work with patients who use CPAP. Some of you use CPAP yourselves. Patients tell you a lot of times, well, I use it for a few hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, and then I take it off because they think all sleep is the same. So I start the night with it. I get up to go to the bathroom. I don't put it back on. I already slept enough with it. The insurance only wants me to use it for 4 hours. I already have 5. I'm fine. I'm meeting the requirement. They're taking it off when they need it the most. You want to wake up with the CPAP, not go to sleep with it necessarily, because you're trying to prevent the arrhythmia. Sleep apnea is worse in REM sleep, and that's what's often ignored. So let there be no doubt, sleep apnea can kill you. Not just kill you, you can kill others, because you can crash your car if you have sleep apnea. And CPAP, it's not just plain CPAP anymore. A lot of different variations on it now. There's automatic CPAP, bilevels, bilevel with a backup rate, automatic bilevels. ASV, adaptive servo ventilators, are important in cardiology. We use those for patients who have both central and obstructive apnea in combination. But so originally they were using a lot for patients with congestive heart failure that have central apneas, that Cheyne-Stokes breathing. But it turns out that if your ejection fraction is below 45, it actually increases mortality. So one of the things we want to know is if we're considering ASV in a patient, is what's the ejection fraction, and when can we use it or not. AVAPs and IVAPs are both for our heavier patients who are hypoventilating. Sleep apnea is a throat disease, right? Your throat's narrow, it's not a lung disease. But there are people who have both lung disease and throat issues, so that these combination machines can work. When should you prescribe a fixed pressure CPAP machine? I think never. When they first came out, they were more expensive, but now they're the same price. There's no real reason to have somebody in a fixed pressure CPAP machine. Especially if you get CPAP machine, most insurance will let you get a machine for 5 years. So you can say, well, you need a size 9 or a pressure of 10 centimeters. Well, there's no guarantee it's going to stay the same for those 5 years. So automatic machines are going to be dynamic and fluctuate with the patient. The patient may lose weight or gain weight. The machine adapts to it. So it's amazing how often I still see patients coming from out of town with fixed pressure machines. Or even worse, they charge them for a automatic machine, but they still get a fixed pressure setting on it. And I always tell them, your computer's turned off on it. I see that a lot. I see all kinds of things. I don't know. My colleague and friend, Dr. Trevor's there. I saw a guy on Monday. He bought his machine on Craigslist. And he said he had it for a while. He wanted to check it out. And if you know the CPAP machines have a little water chamber inside, right? And I looked at the water chamber, and there's a kind of yellowish crud on the bottom of it. So with my nail, I put my finger in there and I scratched it off. And I said, what have you been doing with it? You're not using distilled water or anything? He goes, no, I never put any water in it. It came that way. So he's been inhaling somebody's dried up mucus for a long time. And that's not the grossest thing I'm going to talk to you about, though. I saw a little girl, a 6-year-old. I have pictures I can show you. She has one of the CPAP masks that's foam on the side, and she was drooling into the mask. But because of the pandemic, the parents did not bring her in to get checked, and they ran out of stopped getting the inserts. You usually get them every month. So she'd had the same mask for months and months and months, was drooling into her mask. So when I saw the little girl, I looked at her mask, and I saw that the drool had eroded into the edges of the mask, and mold was growing in it. And she was inhaling this mold, and she is nonverbal, she's autistic. So I took that away from her. I called the DME, and I had them drive there to pick up a new one. See all kinds of things. That's still not the grossest thing I'm going to talk to you about, though. The other thing that happened since I saw you guys last was we had the Philips recall. We had something horrendous happen to our field. It's never happened before. We had a small recall in the past with a company called ResMed that makes CPAP machines. But it wasn't that big a deal. They replaced them quickly. But Philips recalled pretty much all of its machines. And when I'm explaining this to patients, I says, imagine if, let's say, you use an iPhone, and I use an Android, I use a Samsung Galaxy phone. If Samsung announced to the entire planet, that their phones cause cancer, stop using your Samsung phone today, how long would it take Apple to make enough phones for all the Samsung users in the midst of the chip shortage? That's what's been happening. There's class action lawsuits around this. Undoubtedly, you've had patients who've gotten caught up in this. Some of you may have that yourself. I'm getting caught up on this thing. I'm sorry. So it's a problem. And what happened with this, and if you know what the story, there's a piece of foam inside the machines to make them make less noise. And that foam was getting degraded and giving off some volatile gases that were thought to be carcinogenic. And that's why they pulled the machines. There's a new version of that machine out with a different foam. And part of the debate is, or the controversy is, when did the manufacturer know that their foam was causing this problem? Because they replaced the foam in the next model, but announced a recall only after that model came out. So there's kind of something funny going on there, perhaps. I don't know. I don't have any inside information on that. But that's been an issue for a lot of our patients. They can't get the machines. So what's really happening is there are not enough of these ResMed machines available. So there are these off-brands that patients are buying instead. You say, okay, at least they're getting a machine, but they're still getting an off-brand machine, and the insurance pays for a machine every 5 years. So I think 3 or 4 years from now, these patients are going to say, hey, I want to get the other machine. We'll see how this plays out. Has that been your experience, Dr. Trevor, in the community here? The other thing that's kind of new for in our sleep field is this issue of school start times. I've been working with school start times, and California passed a law in 2019. I talked about it last time I was here. Well, 2022 is the year it's going to get implemented. So this summer, actually, it'll be into the fall, no school, and no public high school, except rural districts, by the way. I don't know where some of this area ends up, but no public school in California can force a teenager to be in school before 8:30 in the morning. They can go for electives, but they can't be forced to do that. So California became the first state in the nation to have a law specifically adapted to protect the need for sleep for adolescents. And the reason for this, it took several years to get this to go through. But what seemed to sway the elected officials in Sacramento was the data on suicide. Because we know that not getting enough sleep is an independent risk factor for suicidal behavior among adolescents. Because when you don't get enough sleep, you get impulsive. You make bad decisions. So that's been an important thing that's happening now. There's been an effort to delay the implementation of the law. They're saying that because of the pandemic, we didn't have enough time to implement it. So some communities are resisting it, some are embracing it, but that's what we're dealing with right now. So there's still a lot of politics involved and still some efforts to squash the law or delay its implementation. We'll see how it goes. But right now, it's supposed to be implemented now. Along with this issue of school start times, the other thing that's been in the news, especially in California, has been this issue of daylight savings. And you've heard about this. How many of you like changing your clocks twice a year? How many of you don't like changing your clocks twice a year? Seems to be universal. Nobody really likes changing the clocks. And the reason that we change the clocks was for energy savings that aren't really there. The daylight savings versus standard time, it's easy to confuse them. I find it confusing. The way I learned to keep them apart was, in essence, all you're doing is swapping morning light for afternoon light. That's all it is. Somebody, yesterday I was doing a talk and somebody asked me, says, well, what do we do with this extra daylight? He goes, there is no extra daylight. It's the same daylight. It's just showing up at a different time, right? There's no extra daylight. Says, well, so what's been happening is commercial interest that profit from people doing more things after work. Retailers, golf industry, little leagues, different organizations that will use evening light more are pushing to go to permanent daylight savings time. And the bill that was passed in the Senate was a surprise push. Nobody was expecting it to happen this way. There's actually articles written about what happened in the Senate because it was unanimous consent. People thought when they put it up, there was just people going to oppose it and it was going to go through committees, but nobody opposed it because they actually announced it the Monday or Tuesday right after daylight savings change. Everybody's fed up with changing the clocks. Nobody opposed it. So it passed with unanimous consent to go to permanent daylight savings. It's called the Sunshine Protection Act, which I think is kind of a funny name for something, Sunshine Protection Act. But that's what it's called. Sunshine doesn't need protection, right? But it's called the Sunshine Protection Act. At the same time, in California, there's an effort to go to permanent standard time. And now these different interest groups are coming to a head, and there's ongoing meetings going on. You may recall that in California, there was a referendum that you may have voted on for us to go to permanent daylight savings times. Basically, pretty much we're voting just let's stop changing the clocks. But the way the law was written initially for daylight savings, no states could opt to stay in permanent standard time, but states cannot opt to stay in permanent daylight savings time. So that's why when we had the referendum in California a few years ago, nothing changed because it was a symbolic vote. So now the push has been to go to permanent daylight savings times, and that's what's catching momentum right now. Health organizations like the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and other organizations are opposed to this. The simplest way I explain to people is the simple thing I wrote there. We wake up to light and sleep to the darkness, and this is going to flip it around. When we did the school start time, when I was getting involved in that, it was interesting, different organizations that we started collaborating with. So for the school start times, to my surprise, law enforcement came on the favor of delayed school start times because there's data showing that juvenile crime goes down the later the kids get out of school because they have less unsupervised time. So law enforcement became an ally in our effort to create this law in California, which is going to be implemented this year. With daylight savings, an interesting, unexpected allegiance that I've encountered has been with religious organizations. There are religious groups that have morning prayers, sunrise prayers, particularly in Judaism. And the problem with permanent daylight savings time is that sunrise will not occur in some parts of the country till 9 o'clock in the morning. So they got to wait till 9 o'clock in the morning to do the morning prayers, but they already started their day at work. We already had permanent daylight savings time during the Carter administration. There was a 2-year pilot implementation of permanent daylight savings time in the United States that was stopped after 10 months because kids were killed waiting for buses in the morning because they were waiting for the bus in the dark. So some people are trying to get right back to that. But hopefully this is not gonna pan out. We'll see. There's also an effort for California to go to permanent standard time, thinking that if California does it, then the other states will follow along. That seems to be what's happening with the school start time, by the way. Other states are trying to do similar laws to what California's been doing. But that's what we're dealing with now. Let's talk a little about pharmacology. And primary care people here? How many of you prescribe trazodone? Raise your hands if you prescribe trazodone. You do? Look up on your phones, all of you, if you get a chance. You showed some nice photos. Look up this one. Look up trazodone and amputation. Look that up, guys. I didn't want to show the slides, but look it up on your phones and look at the medical journals, the case reports with the word trazodone and amputation on your phones. None of the practice guidelines support the use of trazodone, often prescribed. American Academy of Sleep Medicine said trazodone should not be used for sleep onset or sleep maintenance insomnia. Basically, they said there's not enough evidence that it actually works and there's too many side effects for it. But trazodone use jumped to 150% when the HMOs started to be pressed, when we started having managed care involved in our formularies. So the Academy of Sleep Medicine recommends that it not be used. The American College of Physicians also does not recommend that it be used in their guidelines on how to treat insomnia. They mention all the other drugs you could use. Trazodone is not on the list of what they recommend. College of Physicians does not recommend trazodone to be used. And the Cochrane database system, they do this meta-analysis. And again, same thing. They said there's not enough evidence supporting its use, and you can look at the numbers for it, but it's not recommended that it be used at all. The topic of priapism never comes up when we talk about other sleeping aids, does it? And this is a real thing. So physicians will often say, primary care providers will say, well, that's a very rare complication, 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000, which means in your career you may never have a case of priapism among your patients. But when dealing with disease like insomnia that affects millions of people, chronic insomnia defined as having poor sleep for more than 3 months. Many of our patients have it for decades. Having insomnia for more than 3 months, 3 times a year, that's about 10 to 15% of the country. So millions of people have insomnia in the United States. And that's one of the problems we have with trazodone, that inevitably there are going to be cases for it. And by the way, the priapism said, well, is it dose related? It's actually the opposite. It's low dosages, 150 or less. Most of your patients take 50, maybe 75 milligrams of trazodone. And it happens within the first month. So if somebody's been taking it for years, that's fine, I guess. It's lower risk, but I wouldn't start it. So what I'm supposed to be doing this week, and I was working out last night, I'm writing a paper, and the title is Trazodone Should Never Be a First-Line Agent for the Treatment of Insomnia, and hopefully to finish that paper this weekend. So this has been on my mind, the data on this. Definitely, I don't think it should be used at all, especially not in men. And then there's further papers on it that when priapism does occur, they're supposed to get quick evaluations in the ER, but some people don't realize it's a drug effect and delay getting attention. It says if you're going to prescribe the medication, you're supposed to do a physical exam of the patient's genitalia. How often are you doing that? Looking for Peyronie's disease, for example, and other defects or prior history. So it's not really screened properly. And there's a whole now reports of litigation involving the use of trazodone because patients say nobody told them this could happen. So newer medications, Sunosi is to keep you awake. Wakix is to keep you awake. Wakix, by the way, pitolisant is not scheduled. So usually when we think about stimulants, we think of things that are scheduled. That's a non-scheduled unscheduled agent. There's a new category of hypnotics, and they work through blocking the orexin system. Remember at the beginning of the talk, I told you about sleep fragmentation in the elderly and the aged mice, at least, was related to hypocretin hyperactivity. These newer category of hypnotics act in the exact same system by lowering the activity with it. I'm not saying it's going to make you younger, but things are changing. And in fact, one of them, the first one to come out, suvorexant, actually has been shown to be effective in patients with Alzheimer's. Usually worry about people, the elderly, when you give them these kind of medications that they may fall. By the way, the highest incidence of falls, guess us with which medication? Trazodone. Makes them ataxic, makes them lightheaded. So potentially, we're going to be using more of these, the new mechanism of action. They're called, they have a cute name, Dora, dual orexin receptor antagonist. Orexin and hypocretin is the exact same neuropeptide. It just has two names, depending on how it's being described, but it's the exact same compound. And there's two types. So these newer agents, there's only two right now. There's a third one coming out in the near future. So this is how the way to go. Usually if you prescribe hypnotics, first of all, first line for insomnia is not any of these medications. First line for insomnia is behavioral training, cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's what we do the most. But still, we're going to prescribe medications for many patients, or they may take some time to get behavioral training done, or it's not available in the community. So we will prescribe medications always. But I think we're going to be moving away from the typical benzodiazepine type medications and more towards this newer category of medications. I think there may be some advantages to it. And usually the hassle with these things has always been getting authorizations, pre-authorization stuff. It's something you're nodding your head. At least with the last one, suvorexant, it seems like they've relaxed their rules with some of the patients. So you can check with your local pharmacy and your coverage, but it seems like it's easier to prescribe. I was surprised it's gotten easier. Now it gets approved. And the electronic medical record system that I use at where I work at Stanford, if you punch in the medication, it tells you the coverage for the specific patient. So I'm surprised it seems to be going through. The other thing that we talk about is sodiumoxidate. And now the brand name for that was Xyrem, but it was a high sodium form of it. Now there's a low sodium version of it. So that's better, especially because the high sodium version could cause problems like bedwetting in some of the patients. Finally, I want to leave you with this saying. It's something that I've been saying for some time. It's how I started the talk. I was talking to you about this. I did put out a book last year, so if anybody wants it, they can grab it online. We weren't allowed to bring it here, we were told, but you guys can grab it. And I think we have time. We finished early. We have time for questions. So let's stop there. Thank you so much for your time.